Elena Marini, 25, could hear when time was about to break. She could rebuild a dead watch from a handful of bent brass and patience. She could tell when a room had slipped out of rhythm before anyone else understood what felt wrong. But the night she predicted the shooting 5 minutes before it happened, she couldn't stop the first bullet from drawing blood. A charity gala, a silver watch, one man too still near the West Pillar. By midnight, my shop keys were useless. My old life had a price on it, and the only person who believed me had men locking every door behind me. I had warned a mafia boss because I thought someone would die if I stayed quiet. I did not understand then that speaking to Dante Salvatore would cost me everything time had left untouched. But I wasn't the only one watching. In the shadows of that ballroom, Dante stood perfectly still, Chicago's most feared mafia boss. A man driven by the sister he had failed by 3 minutes and the woman who counted backward under gunfire instead of screaming. When he asked me how I knew, I should have lied. I didn't. He opened the watch when I warned him. The first sound I noticed was the click, not the violin, not the low 100-voice murmur drifting through the ballroom of the Bellafont Hotel. Not the polite laughter of donors pretending they had never sat across from blood money as long as it wore a tuxedo. The click, a silver pocket watch snapping open in a man's hand. I was on my knees beside the grandfather clock. The hotel manager had begged me to look at before the auction started. The old thing had been losing 38 seconds an hour, and it offended me on principle. My father used to say time did not forgive negligence. I had lived like that sentence was scripture. I looked up because of the watch. Dante Salvatore stood near the center of the room with men orbiting him at a careful distance. He was taller than every story I had heard about him. Dark suit, black tie, a face that did not invite interpretation. Other men in the room moved with the restless importance of people who needed to be seen. He did not. He barely moved at all, and somehow everything arranged itself around that stillness. He checked the watch, closed it, and the room continued breathing. But wrong. I felt it before I understood it. The same change in pressure I had felt in a courthouse hallway when I was 12. The same hollow shift under the skin of a room right before the world tore open. People think danger arrives loud. It doesn't. First, it rearranges the air. I rose too fast, nearly left my screwdriver on the carpet and forced myself to look slowly. My pulse went hard enough to hurt. West Pillar. A waiter whose tray was too light for how carefully he carried it. Near the string quartet. A man in a dark jacket who kept touching his right sleeve, not his wrist, higher. At the far doors. 2 exits that had been casually opened 10 minutes ago were now eased almost shut. I counted without meaning to. 3 security men by the bar, 1 at the rear. 2 servers moving against the room instead of through it. 5 minutes. I started walking before I had decided to. One of Dante's men stepped in front of me so quickly I almost hit his chest. He had the flat expression of someone paid to be unimpressed by panic. "Sir," I said. He did not move. "I need to talk to him. You and everyone else. Then tell him the man by the West Pillar is going to shoot him in under 5 minutes. That changed something. The bodyguard's eyes sharpened. He touched his earpiece, said nothing, then let me through with one hand hovering close enough to grab me if I ran. Dante turned before I reached him. That was what struck me first. Not that he was beautiful, because he was not in the easy way. He was worse than that, precise. He looked at people like he was measuring where they would break. "What?" he said. No wasted syllables. No patience either. I stopped close enough to smell cold air on his coat, like he had stepped in from the Chicago night and brought a piece of it inside with him. "The man by the West Pillar," I said. "He's going to pull a gun." Dante's eyes did not flick toward the pillar. He kept them on me. "How did you know? His tray is empty. His sleeve is weighted. Your exit's changed, and the quartet's cellist keeps looking at the door instead of the music." My voice shook on the last word. I hated that. You have 5 minutes. Maybe less. The question was not whether he believed me. It was what kind of man he was if he did. He opened the watch again. Click. I heard myself swallow. 4 minutes and 32 seconds later, he said quietly to the man at his left, "Take the West Pillar alive if you can. Dead if he makes it difficult." Nobody ran. Nobody shouted. His men moved like a tide changing under moonlight. Smooth, certain, terrifying, and Dante stayed where he was. That was when I understood power in its ugliest form. Not loud, not theatrical, not even angry. Just absolute confidence that violence, if required, would happen for him and around him. I should have left. Every sensible part of me knew that. But then I saw a little girl in a pale pink dress, standing too near the dessert table, staring at the room with that helpless, frozen confusion children get right before adults fail them. "Down," I whispered, grabbing her hand. She looked at me with huge eyes, under the table. Now I dropped with her, silk tablecloth brushing my face, sugar and lemon from the pastries sharp in the air. She started to cry when the first shot cracked across the ballroom. So I did the only thing my body remembered from 12 years old. I counted backward. 10, I whispered. 9, 8, stay with me, sweetheart. 7. More shots. Men shouting now, chairs scraping. The girl shook so hard her teeth knocked together. 6, 5, look at me, not them. 4. A body hit the floor somewhere close. Glass broke. I did not scream, not because I was brave. Because screaming had never once made a bullet gentler. 3, 2. A hand yanked the cloth aside. I flinched so hard my shoulder slammed the table leg. Dante crouched there, jacket open, eyes flat with something colder than fear. There was blood on his cuff that did not seem to be his. The little girl flung herself at one of his guards. Dante looked at me instead. "You stayed," he said. I was still counting, breathless under my breath. 1. His gaze lowered to my mouth, then rose again. "Of course you did." He stood and offered me nothing so soft as a hand, just an order to the room. "Bring her." "I can go home," I said immediately. "No," I pushed out from under the table on trembling knees. "I warned you, that's all. I don't want anything." For the first time, something moved in his face. Not warmth, not kindness. Something stranger. "No," Dante repeated. "That's why you're coming." One of his men lifted my dropped tool roll from the carpet. Another retrieved my purse. The hotel manager was being escorted out, white as milk. The West Pillar waiter lay face down between 2 guards, moaning into marble. Dante turned to me as if the decision had already been made an hour ago. "Walk," he said. Then to the guard at my shoulder, "Don't lose the little clock." Little clock, cold, observational. A label given to a useful thing. I should have argued harder. I should have bitten somebody, run for a side door, called the police, called literally anyone else. Instead, I walked across a ballroom that smelled like roses, cordite, and spilled champagne, following the mafia boss I had just saved into the part of the night that would not give me back. The car door shut. The next one locked behind me. Pasta, blood, and his rules. If fear had a texture, it was marble at 3 in the morning, cold under bare feet, too smooth to hold on to, expensive enough to make you resent it. The Salvador Lake house sat on the dark edge of Lake Michigan like an old sin with good landscaping. By the time they brought me there, my hands had stopped shaking only because exhaustion had blunted them. Somebody had taken my phone to check it. Somebody else had left a folded sweatshirt on the bed in the room they had assigned me, locked from the outside, of course, courtesy with iron underneath it. I had slept for 40 minutes, maybe less. Then I heard voices in the hall and opened the door before my pride could warn me not to. A guard the width of a refrigerator looked down at me. "You need something?" "My phone." "No." "An explanation?" He almost smiled. "Definitely no." I shouldered past him anyway because panic made me stupid. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and gun oil. Somewhere downstairs a cabinet closed. Somewhere farther away, a man said something sharp in Italian, and the whole house seemed to listen. I found the kitchen by scent before sight: garlic, butter, burnt espresso, real life trying its best to survive inside an unreal one. 3 men were in it. One I recognized from the ballroom, Luca Greco, Dante's security chief, broad-shouldered and watchful, with the tired eyes of a man who had not trusted peace in years. The second man had his suit jacket off, tie half undone, and was peering tragically into a bowl of plain lettuce as if it had insulted his ancestry. The third was Dante. He stood at the long counter with one hand braced on the stone, while an older woman in a black dress shirt cleaned blood from the cut at his temple. His attention shifted to me before anyone else spoke. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I folded my arms, suddenly conscious of the borrowed sweatshirt swallowing me whole. "Not with your hospitality," the man with the lettuce sighed. "I told them locking doors makes women murderous. It's bad for morale and terrible for the hinges." "Paolo," Luca said. "What?" "I'm being supportive." Dante's eyes stayed on me. "Sit." "No." That was my first act of defiance in his house. It was not strategic. It was the kind that comes from being too frightened to perform politeness. Paolo looked between us and muttered to the ceiling, "Dear God, let no one get shot before breakfast." The older woman cleaning Dante's wound snorted. "In this house." "Pray harder, Lucia," Paolo said with wounded devotion. "I would, but fasting has made me spiritually brittle." Dr. Lucia Morty rolled her eyes so elegantly it deserved applause. "You ate prosciutto in the car." "It was emergency protein." Despite myself, my mouth twitched. Dante noticed. That annoyed me more than it should have. "I want my phone," I said. "You'll get it back when I'm finished with it. It's my property. And you became my problem the second you warned me in a room full of witnesses." His voice never rose. That made it worse. A raised voice you could push against. His calm just settled over the room and made resistance feel childish. "I didn't ask to be your problem." "No." Something unreadable passed across his face. "You didn't ask for anything." There it was again, that strange weight on the fact that I had not bargained. Luca set a thin folder on the counter. "We checked the hotel cameras." Shooter came in on catering credentials. Someone fed him floor plans. "Inside job?" Lucia asked. "Looks like it." My stomach tightened. I had known enough to fear the gunman. I had not allowed myself to think about the kind of world where a room could be prepared for blood in advance. "I need to call my shop," I said. "I have clients, repairs. I open at 9. "You won't be opening anything today," Dante said. Anger came hot and stupid. "You don't get to decide that." He turned then fully, and I saw how little blood was actually on him. He had been close to gunfire and still looked as composed as a confession booth. Clean temple, dark eyes, hands too steady. "That's exactly what I do," he said. Silence fell with surgical neatness. Paolo stabbed a cherry tomato with a fork and whispered, "This is the part where my cardiologist mother says I should have been an accountant." "You still could be," Lucia said. "I can't do spreadsheets, they feel accusatory." Luca took a phone from his pocket and held it out to me. "Call your shop from mine, speaker." I hated that he was being fair. I took it, dialed. Waited. My assistant Nina answered on the second ring. "Marini Restoration." Relief nearly made me sit. "Nina, it's Alina." A beat. "Alina, thank God." "There are 2 men outside and one of them looks like he irons his socks. They said we're closed today for maintenance." I looked up slowly. Dante did not blink. "You sent men to my shop. For your safety. You don't get to do that." He let me burn through the words. "Anyone connected to you is vulnerable until I know who wanted me dead and why they know your face." Nina lowered her voice. "Should I be worried?" "Yes," I snapped, then closed my eyes. "No. I mean go home, lock up, I'll call later." "You sound strange. I'm tired." I ended the call before she could ask more. When I put the phone down, Dante slid a porcelain cup toward me. "Espresso." Dark as a threat, I stared at it. Poison. If I wanted you dead, little clock, breakfast would be a waste of time. I should have hated the nickname. Maybe I did. But it threaded under my skin anyway, catching on something that had not been touched in years. Lucia finished with his temple and swatted Paolo's hand away from a basket of bread. No carbs. I'm an Italian man in captivity, he said mournfully. This is a human rights violation. For one absurd second I laughed. The kitchen stilled around the sound. Dante watched me over the rim of his coffee cup, expression unreadable, as if he had not expected laughter to survive the night either. Then he set the cup down. Click. The watch in his hand opened and shut with that same soft metallic certainty. You have 3 rules, he said. I stood straighter. I didn't agree to any. Stay inside the property. Don't use a device I haven't cleared. Don't lie to me again by omission. My face went hot. I didn't lie. You know more about rooms before violence than a civilian should. Every muscle in me turned to wire. Luca noticed. Lucia did too. Only Paolo looked decently embarrassed for existing in the blast radius. My mother died in a courthouse shooting, I said. I was 12. Nobody moved. There, Dante said quietly. Now we're closer to honesty. It was not an apology, not even kindness, but he did not press, not then. He took his cup, his watch, and his impossible calm with him toward the door. He paused once, hand on the frame. Without looking back, he said, You can hate the house. You can hate me, but until I say otherwise, you breathe under my roof. Then he left, quiet control. No threats, no raised voice. Just a man accustomed to being obeyed and a house that obeyed first. The thing I repaired told him too much. By noon, the lake house had taught me its hierarchy. Guards first, silence second, answers last. I learned where the cameras were because I did not want to trip over my own humiliation every time I walked to the kitchen. I learned Teresa Anselmi, the housekeeper, had kind eyes and the authority of a woman who had survived bad men, by developing opinions sharp enough to skin them. I learned Luca would answer a practical question if I asked it plainly, and would ignore anything that smelled like manipulation. And I learned Dante could enter a room without hurrying and make everyone inside. It'd stand a fraction straighter before their minds caught up. I also learned I could not bear sitting still while other people handled my life. So when Teresa mentioned there was an old workroom off the east corridor, mostly junk, but there's light, I asked for a screwdriver set and carried my temper in there like a live coal. The room smelled of cedar, dust, and old lacquer. Someone had stored broken clocks on the shelves, as if time itself came there to wait for repair. I ran my fingers over a cracked music box shaped like a little theater and felt my pulse settle for the first time since the ballroom. This, at least, I understood. I took the back plate off and found the spring slightly warped, the comb misaligned, one tiny screw missing. Damage like that never happened all at once. It came from years of small neglect. A betrayal in installments. I was bent over it when Dante stopped in the doorway. I did not turn immediately. If you're here to confiscate tools, do it quickly. Teresa said you'd disappear into wood shavings if I left you alone. I looked up then. He had shed the suit jacket, white shirt. Sleeves rolled once. His face had not softened with daylight. If anything, the sun made his control look more deliberate. I needed something to do with my hands. His gaze dropped briefly to the music box, then to my fingers. You stopped shaking. That happens when people give me solvable problems. Are men with guns not solvable? I fitted a replacement screw from the box Teresa had found for me. Not by me. That's not what I saw. I ignored the answer because it wanted too much. Instead, I wound the mechanism gently. The box gave a stuttering first note, caught, then found the rest of its melody. Thin, beautiful, injured but trying, Dante listened without moving. It isn't the spring, I said before I thought better of it. What? The spring is fine. It's the housing that cracked. People always blame the part under tension. Usually it's the thing around it that failed first. For a second something like recognition touched his eyes, then it was gone. "You talk to objects," he said. "Only the honest ones." The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, the memory of one. "Luca said your shop specializes in clocks and restoration." My shoulders tightened. "Did Luca say that, or did you already know?" A pause. "Interesting. What else do you know about me?" I asked. "Enough." That's not an answer. It wasn't meant to be. I hated how my body noticed stupid things around him. The line of tendons in his wrist. The faint clean scent beneath the colder night smell he carried, cedar and soap and outside air. The way he filled a doorway without leaning on it. I kept my attention on the music box because that felt safer than admitting he made the room feel smaller. He stepped inside at last. One step only, still enough to make my pulse misbehave. "Play it again," he said. I wound it and held it out. He did not take the box, he took my wrist, not roughly, that would have been simpler. His fingers closed just above my pulse, steady and cool, anchoring me in place while the music box trembled between us. That was almost the first kiss, though neither of us moved like it. Almost was worse. "You feel the room before it changes," he said quietly. "Yes." How? I should have lied. Instead, I heard my mother's last wet breath in a courthouse corridor, and told the truth sideways. Some people hear a wrong note and can't enjoy the song until they find it. And you? I hear the wrong note and wait for the glass to break. He let go. The absence of his hand landed harder than the touch had. Luca appeared at the door without knocking. "Boss." Dante turned. Luca's face gave nothing away, but there was strain in it. "We found the caterer whose credentials were copied. He's dead." My stomach dropped. "Dead? Execution style," Luca said. "Dumped near Navy Pier." The room changed. Not with gunfire this time. With knowledge. Dante's jaw shifted once. "Who found him?" "Anonymous tip." "Convenient." Luca's gaze flicked to me, then back to Dante. "There's more. The West Pillar shooter had a phone. Last outgoing number traces to a burner used by a Vescari warehouse foreman last month. I didn't know the name. I knew from the silence that followed that I should." Dante closed his hand over the pocket watch in his palm. Click. Open. Shut. "Leave us," he told Luca. Luca obeyed. I hated that I was still here when the temperature of the house fell another degree. "Whose Vescari?" I asked. "One branch of a family tree that should have been cut back years ago." That sounded personal. Everything that survives long enough becomes personal. He moved past me to the workbench. Something small and metallic glinted there, his watch. I had not seen him put it down. It was old. Older than the suit, the house, the men with earpieces. The engraving on the back had worn smooth where a thumb would rub it too often. Without asking, I said, "The hinge is loose." His eyes snapped to mine. I pointed. "On the watch." He didn't hand it to me, he just looked, then looked back. "You noticed from across a room." I heard it. Silence, thick now, different. When he finally placed the watch on the bench between us, he did it with the care of a man setting down something holy or dangerous. "My father had that made," he said. I turned it over. Notched silver, fine interior work, a maker's mark on the inner lip half hidden by age. My breath stalled. I knew that mark, not because I had seen this watch before. Because I had seen that exact crescentan star stamp on the drawers of my father's bench. Marini. I looked up too quickly. Dante was already watching me. Dante he knew the second she saw the mark. Saw it in the dilation of her pupils, the way her breath shortened and her hand hovered instead of taking. Elena Marini looked at his father's watch like she had just found a body beneath the floorboards of her own life. Dante had spent 12 years carrying a watch made by a man whose daughter had walked into his ballroom and changed the shape of his war. He did not yet know whether fate was merciful or cruel. He only knew he did not believe in coincidence. I looked back at the watch and understood two things at once. My father had touched this before me. And nothing about my presence in Dante Salvator's house was accidental anymore. His hand at my throat was the gentlest thing there. The fast answer came wrapped in a power outage. By evening, the lake house had gone dark except for emergency lights along the floor, pale strips of blue that turned everyone ghost-like. Teresa swore in Italian from somewhere downstairs. Paolo shouted that if the freezer died and took his imported turkey meatballs with it, he would sue God personally. Lucia told him she would testify for the freezer. I stood at the landing outside my room with a candle in one hand and Dante's watchmaker's mark burning behind my ribs. I had spent all afternoon trying not to think about my father, about why his maker's stamp sat inside Dante's watch, about the fact that Dante had not asked me what I knew after seeing my face. That restraint had unsettled me more than accusation would have. Below me, men moved with flashlights and low voices. The house had the particular silence of armed people pretending stillness. Then I heard it, not a shot, not yet, a scrape at the east stairwell door, metal where metal should not be. I turned toward it at the same moment the door burst inward. A man in dark clothes hit the landing too fast for thought. I didn't even scream before a hard arm hooked my waist from behind and yanked me back into shadow. Dante. He drove me against the wall beneath the stairs, his body covering mine just as Luca fired twice from the hallway. The house exploded into motion. Boots, shouts, Teresa slamming some distant door. A guard cursing. Dante's hand came up over my throat, not choking, just firm enough to keep me from jerking into the open. "Stay," he said against my hair. The word moved through me like heat and fear mixed together. The intruder bolted for the rear corridor. Luca tackled him hard enough to crack plaster. Someone shouted for zip ties. Paolo, absurdly close by, yelled, "If anyone bleeds on my shoes again, I'm charging hazard pay." Later, when the man was face down and the generator kicked back on with a lurch, I realized I was gripping Dante's shirt in both fists. I let go like it burned. He stepped back immediately, restraint. Again, there was a small cut on my neck where the stair rail had caught me in the struggle. Dante saw it and went very still. "It's nothing," I said. Lucia appeared, hair disordered, medical bag already open. "Everyone in this house says that right before I need stitches." "It's not stitches," I said. Paolo leaned in the doorway holding a flashlight under his jaw like a campfire ghoul. "I always said romance in a blackout would end badly." "No one said romance," I snapped. Paolo lifted both hands. "I'm fasting and therefore delicate." Lucia took one look at my face and said dryly, "Out." "Paolo, I bring light and wit to this household. You bring sodium and bad timing." He left with theatrical suffering. I heard him in the hall mutter, "One day, Lucia Morty, one day you'll appreciate a man who knows his macros." Despite the adrenaline, a laugh escaped me. Small, frayed, real. Dante looked at me, then the way he had in the kitchen. As if laughter in this house was an illicit substance, and I had just smuggled it in. Lucia cleaned the cut on my neck while Dante stood too near and did not touch me again. That should have calmed me. It did not. "How did you hear him before the door opened?" Dante asked. I stared at the opposite wall. The handle moved twice. "That's not enough. It is if you've spent half your life listening for the second wrong sound." He said nothing. So because the day had already ruined discretion, I told him. About the courthouse. About my mother's hand warm around mine. About the way a bailiff near the elevators had kept adjusting the inside of his jacket, while the hallway air went strangely thin. About telling my mother I felt sick, that we should go, and hearing her say, "Only one more minute, Alina." About the first shot. About spending the next 13 years hating the exact length of a minute. When I finished, Lucia had gone very quiet. Even Dante seemed stripped of something, not softness. Something closer to armor shifting. "That's how," I said. "Happy now." He looked at the cut on my throat, not my face. "No," Lucia packed her gauze and stood. She needs sleep. She needs answers, I said. Dante waited until Lucia left. Then he reached into his pocket and brought out the watch. Click. The sound was softer in the half-lit hall. My sister died at 19, he said, eyes fixed on the open face of the watch. In the back seat of a car. She asked me what time it was because she thought if she knew, she could hold on until the next minute. He shut the watch. I never let anyone else keep time for me again. There was more behind that sentence, a graveyard of it. But he would not hand it over neatly, and I understood enough now to know that I did not want neat things from him anyway. Who was the man on the stairs? I asked. Someone testing the house. Who sent him? His gaze lifted. Still deciding whether I'm offended you think I don't already know. Do you? Yes. And I'll deal with it. That was all he would give me. He started to leave, then stopped. Your father repaired more than clocks. The words landed slowly. What does that mean? It means tomorrow you tell me everything you remember about his workbench. My pulse stumbled. Why? Because Vescari men just broke into my house the same day you recognized the maker's mark in my watch. The floor felt less steady than the stairwell had. Before I could answer, Dante reached out. For one impossible second, I thought he was going to touch my face. Instead, he lifted the edge of the bandage at my throat, made sure it sat flat, and let his knuckles rest there for one beat too long. Almost. Then he took his hand away. Sleep, little clock, he said, the name colder than comfort and somehow gentler than that too. Tomorrow will be uglier. He walked off before I could ask whether he meant the war or the truth. The house settled around me with lights restored, armed men posted, and one answer finally dragged into the open. I knew violence before it arrived because I had failed to outrun it once. And now it had learned my name again. I lied for 1 hour and it nearly ruined us. There are truths that arrive like storms. Then there are truths that sit quietly on a workbench and wait for your hands to betray you. Dante set the silver watch in front of me just after lunch, and Luca closed the workshop door behind us. The room held afternoon heat, cut wood, and the faint sweet metal smell of old mechanisms. Outside, somebody fired at targets down by the far field. Inside, Dante stood close enough to remind me that privacy in his world was only another form of pressure. Open it, he said. I'm not a safecracker. You're a restorer. That doesn't mean I should dismantle a family heirloom for a man who watches me like I'm about to set fire to it. If you were going to set fire to it. He said. I'd already know. I hated that he might be right. I took the watch anyway. My father had taught me reverence before skill. Always feel the weight first. Always listen before you force anything. I turned it in my palm, found the hinge looseness I had heard at the hotel, then the almost invisible resistance near the crown. There's a false plate, I said. Dante's expression did not change. Luca's did just barely. You knew, I said. I suspected. Meaning you suspected my father did more than repairs. I suspected my father asked him to. I looked up sharply. Asked him to hide something. Dante's eyes held mine. Yes. Why didn't you say that yesterday? Because I wanted to know whether you recognized the mark from memory or fear. That should have angered me more than it did. Maybe by then I was getting used to being treated like a variable in his calculations. Maybe I was more bothered by the fact that part of me trusted his caution. I used a pin tool and pressure so slight it would have looked like nothing to anyone else. The inner plate lifted. Inside, folded into a compartment no thicker than my little fingernail, was a strip of onion skin paper. Luca swore softly. Dante did not. He took the paper, unfolded it with careful fingers and read. Then he read it again. What is it? I asked. His jaw hardened. Account codes, payment routes, judges, police. Warehouse transfers. Illegal, he gave me a long look. Very. I leaned closer despite myself. The writing was cramped, numbers threaded with initials. Near the bottom was one name written more clearly than the rest. A. Vescari. The room went quiet enough for me to hear the clock on the far shelf miss a beat. "My father hid that," I whispered. "Yes, did he tell anyone?" Dante folded the paper back up. "If he did, that person is dead or very disciplined." I stared at the watch. At the tiny compartment. At the proof that my father, who smelled like machine oil and chamomile tea, and never once raised his voice at me, had existed somewhere inside Dante Salvator's violent architecture. "He told me once," I said slowly, "that honest work sometimes keeps dishonest men alive." Dante's gaze sharpened. "When?" "After my mother died, he took private repair jobs after that. Better money. For my family, I don't know." That was true. It was also not all of it, because I remembered one more thing. A brass key no bigger than a thumbnail, taped beneath the underside of my father's old bench. I had found it at 16 and assumed it belonged to some lock I'd never located. When I reopened the shop after his funeral, I had wrapped it in paper and dropped it into the bottom drawer. I did not tell Dante, not because I meant betrayal. Because I had spent 3 days in his house with my life rearranged by men who decided for me, and the thought of one thing still belonging to my own history felt like oxygen. That was the mistake. Later that afternoon, while Dante took meetings and Luca argued into an earpiece in the hall, I asked Teresa where my clothes from the shop had been placed. She showed me the guest room wardrobe and in doing so, revealed where they had stored my handbag. My spare key ring was still inside. I waited until a guard rotated shifts at the east entrance. Waited until Paolo cornered Luca in the hall to argue, in a whisper that was somehow still dramatic, that starvation was making him meaner than the enemy, and therefore operationally compromised. Waited until the house exhaled around me. Then I left, not forever, not dramatically. Just long enough to get to my shop, open the bottom drawer under my father's bench, and see if the brass key was still there before Dante's world swallowed another piece of my family whole. Chicago felt indecently normal outside the Salvator gates. Traffic lights, wind off the lake. A man jogging with headphones on like bullets were a regional myth. I took a rideshare with cash Teresa had pressed into my hand after one look at my face, and one muttered, "You are not the first woman to do something unwise for answers." The shop smelled like dust, polish, and old cedar when I slipped inside through the alley door. Home. The word hurt more than it soothed. I went straight to the bench, opened the bottom drawer, moved a tray of springs, 2 packets of crystal faces, my father's old magnifier. The key was still there, taped beneath the wood exactly where I remembered it, small and dull and absurdly important. I had just peeled it free when the front bell rang, not the soft customer ring. The hard, decisive push of someone who already knew he would be admitted. I froze. Then a voice drifted from the showroom, warm as old varnish and twice as deceptive. Elena. I had never heard it before, but I knew with sick certainty that this was Alessio Vescari. He was handsome in the way some knives are beautiful. Mid-40s, tailored charcoal coat, silver threading his dark hair at the temples. The kind of face that would make strangers trust him until he opened his mouth long enough to ruin them. His gaze dropped to the key in my hand. "Well," he said softly, "there you are." My throat tightened. "You're in the wrong shop." "Am I?" He looked around at the clocks, the cases, the back room behind me. "Your father was very useful to both our families for a time. It's a pity useful men die before they explain where they've hidden their conscience." I stepped back, every nerve going bright. "I don't know what you're talking about," he smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Dante's restraint feel merciful by comparison. "Of course you do. Dante never sends anyone home without taking the walls apart first. So if you came here alone, little Elena, it means you kept something for yourself." His eyes flicked to the key. How disappointing for him. I should have lied better. I should have run sooner. Instead, I said the stupidest honest thing available. He doesn't own me. No, Alessio said, that's what worries him. The front bell rang again, heavy steps, fast. Luca hit Alessio first. He came through the showroom like a door blown inward, slammed Vescari into the glass case and barked, "Down!" I dropped hard, the key cutting into my palm as two more men flooded the shop behind him. One I knew, one I did not. Glass shivered. Alessio did not even seem surprised. Dante entered last. No shouting, no theatrical fury. Just a stillness so cold it seemed to lower the room's temperature by 10 degrees. He looked at me once. That was worse than if he had screamed. "Outside," he told Luca. Luca hauled Alessio up. Vescari straightened his cuff, smiling faintly even with a split lip. As he passed Dante, he said in a voice meant for both of us, "Ask her what else she kept." Then he was gone. The shop was silent except for the ticking of 23 clocks, all slightly out of sync. Dante closed the front door himself. Click. Not the watch this time, the lock. I stayed crouched because standing felt presumptuous. He held out his hand. I stared at it, then at my own, still clenched. "Give it to me, Alina." Not little clock, not anything intimate or cutting. Just my name, and somehow that landed harder. I put the brass key in his palm. He looked at it once and shut his fingers around it. "You lied by omission." "Yes." "Then you walked out of my house alone with men already moving around you." "Yes." "Why?" The question had no rage in it. That was the problem. Anger would have let me defend myself. This wanted truth. "Because it was my father," I said, my voice breaking in the middle. "Because every hour I spend with you people, I find out another piece of him belonged to a world he never explained to me. Because I wanted one thing, one single thing, that was mine before it became yours." Dante stood very still. Then he crossed the room, took the key to the old cabinet in the rear wall, the one my father never let anyone touch, and turned it. Inside were ledgers, a revolver wrapped in cloth. And beneath both, a photograph, my mother, my father, a much younger Dante's father, another man I recognized from Alessio's face. Family forced into one frame. I heard my own breath go thin. Dante picked up the top ledger, flipped 3 pages, and went cold in a way I had not yet seen. "This is why your father died," he said. I rose too quickly. "He had a stroke." Dante looked at me. "No," he said, "he didn't." The clocks kept ticking. Nothing in my life had ever sounded crueler. When he finally admitted it to himself, grief and fury felt almost identical in the body. By the time we got back to the lake house, I could not tell which one was making my hands shake. My father dead by something other than age and overwork. My mother caught in a photograph beside men who had helped build the architecture of my fear. A ledger full of payments, judges, shipments, names. Proof that honest work had not merely kept dishonest men alive, it had fed them. I did not go to my room. I went to the east terrace because if I stayed inside, I was going to break something expensive, and Paolo would probably mourn the furniture out loud. The night wind came hard off the lake. I welcomed it. It made everything inside me feel less overheated and less human. The terrace doors opened behind me. I didn't turn. If you're here to tell me my father was secretly a criminal mastermind, save it. Dante stopped at my shoulder, close enough that his coat blocked some of the wind. He kept records. That's not the same thing. No, I laughed once, bitter. There's your generosity. He let the silence breathe. That was one of the worst things about him. He knew how to leave space where most people rush to fill it. It made me hear myself too clearly. My father fixed things, I said. That was his religion. If your father or Alessio or whoever came to him with broken watches, broken locks, broken lies, maybe he thought that made him necessary, not guilty. Maybe. I turned then. Do you ever answer plainly? When I can. Can you now? His eyes held mine. I don't know yet whether he was protecting my father from Vescari or Vescari from my father. The ledger tells me he was keeping score. Men only keep score when they think the bill will come due. The watch clicked in his hand, soft, familiar, infuriating. I looked at it because it was easier than looking at him. Do you ever stop touching that? No. Why? A beat. Because the last time my sister spoke to me, he said quietly, she asked what time it was. The wind seemed to stop. He had told me part of that already in the stairwell. Not like this. Not with the night pressed close and the truth stripped clean. There was traffic on Lake Shore Drive, he said. We were supposed to switch cars. I changed the route by 3 minutes because I thought I saw a tail. Alessio knew the second route, not the first. He always did like being useful before he was cruel. Dante's jaw tightened once. The ambush happened at a red light. Rosa was in the back seat. She was 19 and furious at me for canceling dinner. I didn't move. She asked me the time because she thought it meant we were still inside something measurable. His hand closed around the watch. I told her 8:41. There was nothing to say to that. Nothing that didn't sound like theft, so I said the only true thing left. I'm sorry. He looked away toward the dark water. I know, almost. His hand lifted, stopped an inch from my face and dropped again. That was the second time, restraint like a wound. I should have gone inside then. I should have left him to his ghosts and kept mine to myself. Instead, I heard myself ask, what did my father's ledger mean about him dying? Dante's expression hardened again. The date stopped 2 weeks before the stroke that killed him. That could mean nothing. Yes, but Vescari's warehouse foreman also died of a heart event 3 days after disappearing from payroll. And a judge on that list drowned in a bathtub with dry lungs. His voice stayed level, which somehow made it crueler. In our world, convenient deaths are often very organized. My stomach rolled. I wrapped my arms around myself and hated that he saw it. Before either of us could speak again, the terrace glass exploded. Dante moved before I understood the sound. He hit me low around the waist, drove me to the stone, and covered my body with his just as the second shot cracked through the shattered pane. The air filled with powder and glass. Men shouted inside the house. Boots thundered. Someone screamed Luca's name. Stay down, Dante said, and this time it was not a request to the world. It was a vow aimed at me alone. More shots. 1 from the lawn, 2 from the west balcony, coordinated, war then. I tried to breathe under the weight of him and couldn't decide whether I was shaking from fear or the impossible awareness of where every part of him was. His chest over mine. His forearm braced by my head. His breath at my ear, even controlled, impossible. Then his control broke by exactly 1 fraction. A hiss of pain. I went cold. You're hit. It's a graze. That wasn't an answer. He pushed up enough for me to see the dark, wet line along his upper arm. Not deep, bleeding anyway. The shooters retreated within seconds. Salvetter men flooded the lawn. Luca shouted for perimeter lockdown. Paolo, somewhere inside and therefore alive enough to be irritating, yelled, "If anyone dies before I eat, I will haunt all of you specifically." Dante dragged me to my feet and toward the hall. I stumbled once. He caught me and did not let go. Lucia met us halfway with a trauma kit and profanity. Sit. I'm fine, Dante said. You are bleeding on imported stone. Sit. He did because Lucia was apparently the only person in Chicago entitled to address him like a stubborn teenager. I stood too close while she cleaned the graze and muttered about men who collected bullets like loyalty points. Paolo appeared in the doorway, tie askew, hair wild, clutching a protein bar like a religious artifact. I had exactly 1 bite before civilization collapsed. Lucia didn't look up. Tragic. You mock me now, but when famine comes, who will survive me? Because I'm adaptable. You cried when Teresa hid the almond cookies. They were sentimental support cookies. Despite everything, a small, wrecked laugh escaped me. Dante looked up at the sound. Not at Lucia, not at Luca barking orders into a phone, at me, and something in his face changed, not softened, deepened. Dante, he had wanted her from the ballroom in the simplest, most dangerous sense, because she disrupted his control. But that was not why she had stayed under his skin, not the mouth he avoided looking at, not the innocence that still somehow breathed in his house. It was the counting. The way Alina had crouched under gunfire with a stranger's child and spent her fear on someone else. She did it again now, in different forms. She laughed so other people could breathe. She steadied rooms while she was breaking inside them. No woman in his world had ever looked at violence and answered it by making space for another heartbeat. Little clock, he thought, and understood with a violence of his own that he was already lost. When Lucia finished taping his arm, Dante stood. Everyone else seemed suddenly too loud. I want the West Lawn scrubbed. I want traffic cams 6 blocks out. And I want every Vescari account touched by the ledger frozen before morning, he said to Luca. Then he looked at me. You should rest. I'm not tired. You're in shock. I'm angry. Yes. The word sat between us like it knew more than either of us wanted. I followed him down the hall anyway, stopping only when he turned into his office, and I realized I was not supposed to be there. He noticed. Come in or don't, he said without looking back. That was almost the 3rd time. In his office, the city lights from afar cut through the windows in thin, cold bands. The desk was mostly empty except for files, a decanter he never touched, and one framed photograph face down. I stood by the door because getting closer felt like volunteering for something irreversible. He leaned both hands on the desk and bowed his head once, briefly, as if the weight of the day had finally found where to land. I should have kept you in the house, he said. You did. I should have kept you beside me. The room changed. My pulse moved into my throat. He straightened slowly, eyes on mine, and for once there was no distance in him. Just the raw edge of something too controlled for too long. I know, I said, because it cost me to say anything else. He crossed half the room and stopped, restraint again, burning through him. Through me. His hand rose to the bandage at my throat, then lower to the inside of my wrist where my pulse jumped against his fingers. If I kiss you now, he said quietly, it will not be because you are frightened. The honesty of that made my eyes sting. I didn't say I wanted him. I didn't even know if want was the word for this awful, trembling recognition. So I told the truth in the only shape I could manage. If you do, I whispered, I won't understand myself after. Something cracked in his face, not composure, something sadder. Then he kissed me, not hard, not greedy. Like a man refusing himself even as he gave in. His mouth touched mine once, carefully, and the whole room seemed to pull inward around that single point of contact. I had thought desire would feel like heat. It felt like grief with nowhere safe to go. When he drew back, his forehead rested against mine for one impossible second. War's here, he said. I knew it because I could still taste him, and because outside his office, the house had already begun to arm itself for morning. The real exit point, war, was less cinematic than I had expected. No dramatic music, no speeches, no men swearing blood oaths over maps. It was phones vibrating at all hours. It was Luca sleeping in 40-minute installments on a sofa outside Dante's office. It was Teresa quietly stocking the pantry with enough food for a siege, while pretending she was only being practical. It was Paolo muttering over calorie counts and ammunition crates in the same breath, as if both offended him equally. And it was casualties, not numbers, not abstractions. People whose coffee orders I had learned. By the 3rd day, I knew the names of the men cycling through the kitchen in clean shirts over fresh bandages. I knew who liked sugar in espresso, and who lied to Lucia about headaches because they didn't want to be benched. I knew the guarded tenderness with which Teresa wrapped a sandwich for Luca when he forgot to eat. I knew Paolo had started hiding chocolate protein pudding behind the flour bins because he was convinced Luca was stealing them, which Luca denied with the dignity of a falsely accused saint and the face of a man absolutely guilty. Then Marco Bellini took a bullet meant for Luca at a warehouse on the west side. I had met Marco in Chapter 2 of this nightmare, though I hadn't known it then. He was the one who always knocked before entering a room, even mine, as if manners were a private rebellion in this house. He oversaw shipping routes and inventory for Dante, which sounded harmless until I realized it meant he kept the city fed, armed, and legally invisible. He had 2 daughters whose photos lived inside his wallet in cracked plastic. He also had a habit of warning me, sotto voce, not to trust easy smiles from men who smelled like expensive cologne and cheap loyalty. Especially cousins, he'd told me in the pantry 2 mornings earlier. They'll kiss your cheek while selling your address. Now he lay in the clinic room off the South Hall, pale under the lights. While Lucia worked, and Dante stood outside the closed door like a man holding back a flood by violence of will alone. I sat on the hallway bench with Marco's wife, Francesca, because nobody should listen to medical silence alone. She twisted her wedding ring until the skin around it reddened. I held a paper cup of water I couldn't drink. Dante did not pace. That would have been easier to witness. He simply stood there, one hand over the watch in his pocket, and somehow managed to look more dangerous than the men bleeding for him. When Lucia finally opened the door, her scrub top dotted red at the sleeve, Paolo appeared from nowhere with a banana in one hand and said, "If you say stable, I'm eating this in celebration. If you say critical, I'm eating it in grief." Lucia stared at him. "You are the strangest form of resilience I have ever met." "Thank you. Marco's alive," she said. "Surgery in the city as soon as transport's secure." Francesca folded in on herself with relief. I held her harder without thinking. Paolo immediately bit into the banana with such solemnity that even Lucia's mouth twitched. Then Dante looked at me. No one else would have noticed anything in that glance. I did. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition. Or simply the fact that I had again spent my fear on someone else. The day got worse from there. At dusk, Dante sent me upstairs while men moved weapons through the lower hall. I hated being managed more than ever. Which probably explains why I went to the laundry room instead, and stayed there helping Teresa fold sheets, just to prove I could contribute something besides panic. That was where the message found me. A box, plain brown, left at the service door. Teresa called for Luca. I already knew something was wrong by the way the tape had been wrapped, too neat, too deliberate, almost ceremonial. Inside was Marco's wedding band, and a note, "Next time I TS the girl." For a second the room lost depth. Teresa said my name. Luca swore with actual feeling. Somewhere down the hall a door opened and shut hard. Dante arrived, took one look, and the house went silent around him. He picked up the ring without touching the note. His face emptied out completely. "Get Francesca out through the north route," he told Luca. "Double car, no phones, Teresa stays with her." Teresa nodded once, already moving. Then Dante turned to me. "You're leaving." I stared. "What? Tonight, airport, new passports. Zurich first, then Rome if we need distance." My body went rigid. "No," his gaze did not flicker. "That wasn't a choice. You don't get to put me on a plane every time your world becomes inconvenient." Inconvenient. The quiet in his voice was lethal now. "They sent a wedding ring to my house with your life attached to it as punctuation. I know what they did. Do you?" He stepped closer. "Because I'm not interested in discovering whether your talent extends to predicting your own body in a morgue." I slapped him. The sound cracked through the laundry room. Luca looked away. Teresa pretended to be very occupied by towels in the hall. Dante didn't touch his face. I had never hit anyone in my life. My palm burned. My chest hurt. My voice shook so badly I almost hated myself for speaking. "You don't get to save me by erasing me," I said. "Not again. Not after everything you've dragged into the light." For the first time, something like pain crossed his face. Not from the slap. Then he did something worse than forcing me. He stepped back. "There's a car in 20 minutes, he said. "If you want the door, take it." And he left it unlocked. That was the exit point. Real, clean, mine. I went. I packed in 12 minutes, mostly by throwing things into a case I never wanted to own. Paolo met me in the garage with red-rimmed eyes and 3 carefully wrapped turkey meatballs for the road, because he said grief was no excuse for protein failure. Then more quietly, "He's trying not to choose himself over you, it's making him insufferable." I almost smiled, almost cried instead. Lucia hugged me once, fast and hard, then pressed a burner phone into my hand. "If you faint, bleed, or do anything embarrassingly noble, call me." Luca drove. We made it 8 blocks before he handed me an envelope from the center console. Inside was the photograph from the cabinet and 1 sheet from the ledger. At the bottom, in my father's handwriting, were 6 words. Rosa was not the intended target. I stared so hard my eyes watered. Luca kept driving. "He didn't want you to see that yet. Why are you showing me? Because if you leave blind, you'll build the wrong man in your head." His grip tightened on the wheel. "And because Marco bled for this family today, we're done paying for old lies." The airport lights appeared ahead, bright and ordinary. I could leave, get on a plane, take a new passport, become someone else for the second time in my life, and live forever with the knowledge that Dante's sister had maybe died in place of someone else, and that my father knew. "Turn around," I said. Luca didn't answer. "Turn the car around." When he did, it cost me more than courage. It cost me the version of myself that still believed survival meant distance. I walked back into Dante's darkness with my eyes open, and for the first time, I chose it. The traitor was the one who smiled easiest. When Luca and I returned to the lake house, nobody looked surprised. That was almost insulting. Paolo, standing in the foyer with a duffel bag and a hard-boiled egg, just nodded at me and said, "Excellent. I already ate your farewell meatballs in despair, so this is emotionally complicated." I laughed despite the rawness in my chest. Then Dante came down the stairs. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom when he saw me. No visible relief, no anger either, just that unbearable stillness. "You came back." I held up the page from the ledger. Rosa wasn't the intended target. Every line in his body changed. Luca shut the front door quietly behind us and handed Dante the rest of the envelope. She needed to know. Dante read the page once. His face went blank in the way I had learned to fear. "Who else has seen this?" he asked. "Only us," Luca said. Paolo raised his egg slightly. "And me technically, because I have eyes and terrible timing." Dante ignored him. That was wise. Encouraged, Paolo added, "For the record, I support emotional transparency and strategic homicide in equal moderation." "No one asked," Luca said. "They should. I'm balanced." Dante looked at me again, and whatever he saw there made him exhale through his nose as if something inside him had finally unclenched a fraction. "Office," he said. This time I went without stopping at the door. We spread the ledger pages across his desk, payment trails, dates, names. Judges and patrol captains and a city councilman whose charity gala smile I now wanted to scrape off with a blade. My father's notes in the margins. Tiny, careful corrections. And in the later pages, shorthand I recognized from childhood when he didn't want customers reading over his shoulder. It took me 20 minutes to break the code. "R doesn't mean root," I said. "It means Rosa." Dante went very still. I followed the notation trail with my finger. "Here, here, and here. These aren't warehouse movements, they're social appearances, fundraisers, family dinners." Church, he was tracking where she was supposed to be. "Why?" Luca asked. I found the answer 3 lines lower and wished I hadn't. because beside one entry in my father's hand was written, AV. Asked whether she still borrows the car. The room changed, not because a mystery had closed, because it had deepened into something uglier. He wanted your father to monitor her, I whispered. Dante's hand flattened over the desk so hard I thought the wood might crack. Luca swore softly. Alessio was trying to mark patterns. For me, Dante said, nobody argued. The listener in the room, some cruel, objective part of fate, already knew what I had just understood. Rosa died because Alessio wanted Dante contained, moved, predictable, punishable. Not because she was expendable, because she was close enough to hurt him permanently, and my father knew enough to write it down. I looked at Dante and saw the exact second grief became intent again. We moved tonight, he said. That was when the lights went out, not dimmed, died. A concussion hit the west wall so hard the windows flexed inward. The desk lamp shattered. Somewhere in the lower hall, Teresa screamed. Men shouted. Gunfire started almost immediately, close enough to make the office floor jump. Down, Luca barked. Dante pushed me behind the desk and drew his weapon in one clean movement. The office door burst open before anyone could bar it. Not attackers. Marco, blood on his shirt, face white, breathing hard. For one beautiful second, relief hit me. Then I saw the gun in his shaking hand pointed at Luca. The traitor was the one who knocked before entering, the one with daughters in his wallet. The one who had warned me about smiling men. Don't, Luca said quietly. Marco's eyes were full of something wrecked. They have Francesca. No one moved, of course. Not greed then, not ambition. Pressure, the most human corruption in the world. Dante's voice came out low and terrible. How long? Marco swallowed. Since the warehouse. I told them rotation schedules, camera dead zones. I swear to God I never meant. The second explosion cut him off. The wall behind us blew inward in plaster and smoke. I hit the floor. Somebody grabbed me, Luca maybe, and then the office wasn't an office anymore. Just dust, shouting, splintered wood, and the violent certainty that the house had been breached from two directions. I lost Dante in the smoke. Move, Luca shouted. He dragged me toward the service stairs. Marco staggered after us, coughing. I heard Paolo below, actually praying now. Dear Lord, if I survive this, I will eat vegetables voluntarily. That's the least believable thing you've ever said, Lucia snapped from somewhere in the dark. Then hands caught me from behind. Not Luca's, a cloth over my mouth. Chemical and bitter, I fought, harder than I thought I could. Caught an elbow, heard a grunt, kicked backward and connected with a shin. But there were two of them, maybe three. One hit the back of my knee, another wrenched my wrist. The world tilted. Smoke filled my throat. My last clear image before blackness took me was Dante through the haze, turning at the sound of my struggle, and not reaching me in time. I got myself out before he found me. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the silence. No ticking, no kitchen noise, no footsteps in hallways, no lake wind against glass. Just a single fluorescent hum and the drag of my own breath. I was tied to a metal chair in a concrete room with no windows and one drain in the floor. The kind of room built by men who wanted cleanup to be easy. My wrists burned where the zip ties bit. My head felt packed with wool from whatever they had used on the cloth. Across from me sat Alessio Vescari. No jacket now, shirt sleeves rolled. He looked less polished without the tailored coat and somehow more dangerous for it, human enough to be disappointing. I was beginning to think you'd sleep through the interesting part, he said. I swallowed against the chemical taste in my mouth. You always talk like you're auditioning for your own funeral, he smiled. Good. If I was still capable of being rude, I had not broken. That edge, he said. Dante likes it, doesn't he? Though I don't think that's what caught him first. I said nothing. Counting backward under the dessert table, Alessio went on softly. That was what my man reported, not the warning. The child, my blood went cold. So Dante wasn't the only one haunted by that moment. You know what your father understood? Alessio asked. That Dante mistakes people who soothe his grief for salvation. It's a very expensive mistake in our line of work. My father wrote everything down because he knew men like you rotted from the inside. Alessio's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Your father wrote things down because he was tired of being useful to cowards. Before I could answer, the door opened. Marco came in. He looked worse than when I'd last seen him. Bruised. Dirt on his collar, eyes emptied out. I stared at him. Francesca, his face collapsed for 1 second. Alive, Alessio sighed. This is why coercion is such poor craftsmanship. It leaves everyone sentimental. He stood and crossed to me, crouching until our faces were level. Dante thinks he's different from me because he mourns properly, because he keeps the watch, because he lets women in his house keep their names. Alessio's voice dropped. He's still a man who turns cities into leverage. I wanted to look away. Didn't. Maybe, I said. But you're the man who sends wedding rings in boxes. For the first time, real anger flashed. Good. He struck the chair hard enough to jolt my teeth together, but not me. Still controlled. Still curated. He was exactly what Dante might have become if grief had burned the last human part clean out of him. Leave us, he told Marco. Marco didn't move. Alessio turned slowly. I said, Marco fired. Once. Clean. Center mass. Alessio staggered back into the table by the wall, not dead, not yet, one hand slamming over the wound with shocked fury. Everything happened at once after that. Marco lunged for the knife on Alessio's belt and sliced my wrist ties. Run, he said. I barely got my feet under me before the second guard came through the door. Marco hit him low. They went down hard. A gun skidded across the floor toward the drain. I grabbed it. I had never fired a gun before. My hands knew tools, not this, but weight is weight. Angles are angles, pressure matters. The guard came up first. I pulled the trigger. The recoil shocked all the way to my shoulder. The bullet hit concrete near his foot, but it bought me a second. Marco rammed him into the wall. Alessio, bleeding and white with rage, reached for the fallen knife. I kicked it away. Get out, Marco shouted. I did. The hallway beyond was warehouse dark, lit only by strips of emergency lighting. No clocks, no windows, no way to hear time. That terrified me more than the gunfire behind me. I moved by pattern instead. Airflow, echo, the smell of river water and machine grease. A loading dock nearby. I could feel space opening to the right. 2 men rounded the corner. I ducked into a side room, found a shelf of cleaning supplies, and did the least graceful, brave thing of my life. I hurled industrial degreaser into the hall and smashed the nearest bulb with the gun butt. Darkness, cursing, slipping, I ran. The dock doors were chained from the inside, of course they were. I looked down, padlock, old brass body, cheap mechanism. My father had once made me open one blindfolded for practice. My fingers shook. I used a bent wire from the shelf rack, listened with my whole body and found the pins by feel. 1, 2, 3. Behind me, shouting got closer. 4. The lock snapped open. I yanked the chain free and burst into night so cold it felt like a slap. Water smell. South Branch River maybe, trucks somewhere close. City lights farther off. Then headlights cut across the loading yard. Black SUV, driver's door already opening. Dante. He crossed the distance like a man the world had failed one time too many and would not be allowed a second. I did not remember deciding to run at him. I only knew that 1 second I was in the yard with a stolen gun and my own blood on my wrist, and the next I was in his arms so hard it bordered on pain. He said nothing. Neither did I. His hand came to the back of my head. My face pressed into his coat, breathing cold air, gun smoke, and that familiar clean dark scent that meant him. His heart was hammering. So was mine. Behind him, Luca and 3 men moved into the warehouse. Paolo, impossibly present, shouted from somewhere near the SUV, "If she's alive, I'm having carbs tonight." Lucia's voice came sharp from the passenger side. "Focus, you idiot. It is focus. It's celebratory focus." Dante drew back just enough to look at me. His thumb skimmed the bruised skin at my wrist and then stopped there, resting. "Almost. You got yourself out," he said. "I had help. From Marco," I nodded. Something dark crossed his face, understanding, cost. Then his gaze dropped to the gun in my hand. "Did you fire?" "Badly." His mouth changed, not a smile. "The beginning of one, wounded and disbelieving." "Good." Then he kissed my forehead once, quick and rough, like he did not trust himself anywhere else, and turned me toward the car. The final shape of the villain was clear now. Alessio alive or dying behind us, but fully seen at last. Marco traitor and penitent in the same breath. Dante a man forced toward the worst version of himself by love and blood, and unfinished grief. As the warehouse filled with Salvetter men, I looked back once. I had survived through my own will, not only his arrival, but survival had a cost. I could feel it already. One of us might not live through what came next. The final violence. Alessio did not die in the warehouse. That would have been cleaner than he deserved and kinder than the story allowed. He vanished through a secondary exit while Luca's men were extracting Marco and clearing the dock. Left blood. Left 2 dead guards. Left a trail sharp enough for Dante to follow and old enough to insult him. Marco made it as far as Lucia's clinic room before the hidden damage declared itself. A cracked rib had become a punctured lung somewhere between betrayal and redemption. Francesca got there in time to take his hand. I did not stay for the end. That belonged to them. But I heard Lucia crying once, quietly in the supply room after. The house mourned in practical ways. Teresa made soup no one tasted. Paolo carried boxes without jokes for almost an hour, which frightened everyone more than the firefight had. Luca stopped pretending sleep was optional. Dante locked himself in the office with the remaining ledger pages, and came out at dawn with the look of a man who had made a decision that would cost him something irrecoverable. "We end it tonight," he said. "No speeches, no flourish, just that." The plan lived in maps spread over the dining table where civilized people ought to have eaten pasta. Alessio had retreated to an old lakeside chapel the Vescari family used for private meetings, funerals, and financial crimes disguised as grief. There were tunnels below it left from prohibition. Access points at the sacristy, the crypt, and a service road through the trees. "He'll expect me from the front," Dante said. "He'll expect you from everywhere," Luca corrected. Then we disappoint him precisely. I stood with both hands flat on the table studying the tunnel routes. "This passage floods in spring." 3 men looked at me. I pointed. "The stone darkens differently here. If you trigger panic in the chapel, he won't run for the crypt. He'll take the service road unless he's desperate." Dante's gaze held mine. "And if he's desperate, he goes underground and drowns in his own certainty." Paolo raised a finger. "As someone who fears basements for excellent spiritual reasons, I strongly recommend we not let anyone go underground unless they're already dead." "No one asked," Luca said. "Yet everyone benefits." The plan adjusted around my observation. That should have terrified me more than it did. By sunset, I was in the SUV with Dante, bulletproof vest under a borrowed black coat, pulse steady in a way that scared me on principle. Normal women did not get calmer when approaching armed vengeance at a chapel. Then again, normal had left me back in my shop beside the cabinet key. The chapel sat against the dark water like a promise God regretted making. Stone walls, iron gate, patches of old snow lingering in shadows where the sun hadn't touched, bells silent above us. Dante touched the watch in his pocket before getting out. Click. The sound slid through the car like a blade through silk. "You stay with Luca," he said. "No." His eyes cut to me. "I'm the reason you know about the tunnel," I said. I'm the reason you know Rosa wasn't the target. I'm done being moved off the board when the game turns ugly. Little clock, the name stopped me. Not because it was cruel now, because it was. I know what your world costs, I said. I came anyway. For 1 second, all the air in the SUV changed. Then he nodded once. Stay where I can see you. It was the closest thing to surrender either of us knew how to offer. The first shot started at the chapel doors. After that, time broke into fragments. Luca's men took the left transept. Dante moved down the center aisle so steadily it was almost sacrilegious. Candles shattered. Stones spat dust. A stained glass saint lost half his face to gunfire and kept blessing the room anyway. I stayed low behind a pillar with Luca until the first wave broke and the second route opened toward the sacristy. Then I heard it, not gunfire, a metallic clank below the floor, the tunnel grate. He's running underground, I said. Luca swore and signaled 2 men. Dante caught the motion, read my face, and changed direction at once. We hit the crypt stairs in a rush of cold air and damp stone. Alessio had 1 remaining guard and a body bleeding out by the arch. The tunnel beyond was ankle-deep in black water. Alessio turned at the far end, pale from blood loss but still carrying himself like a man who believed he could argue reality into obedience. This is what you choose her for, he called to Dante. A witness, a conscience. You always did prefer women who made you feel less monstrous. Dante kept walking. No answer, no performance. That frightened Alessio more than fury would have. I saw it happen. Rosa died because you couldn't decide who to protect first, Alessio said, pushing anyway. Your father knew it, the watchmaker knew it, even the girl knows it now. Dante stopped. The tunnel water echoed around us in thin, ugly ripples. You wanted me predictable, Dante said at last. That's all Rosa ever was to you. Leverage, and she was to you, Alessio laughed once, ragged. A clock cousin, another thing you failed to stop. Dante shot the guard before the man could raise his weapon. 1 clean motion. Efficient, disturbing in its precision. Alessio lunged for the tunnel split, slipped, and went to 1 knee. Dante reached him in 3 strides and hit him hard enough to drive him into the stone wall. I had seen Dante violent before, not like this, not stripped of everything except intent. He pinned Alessio with 1 hand at the throat and the gun low at his ribs. No speech, no grand accounting. Just a man finally face to face with the alternate version of himself, the one who had let grief become architecture and called it power. Do it, Alessio choked. Become me properly. For 1 terrible second I thought he would. Then I heard my own voice in the tunnel, small and shaking and still somehow enough. Dante, he looked back. Not because I was innocent, not because I redeemed him. Because he had always chosen my safety over his desire, and somewhere under all this blood he still wanted to be seen by me as more than what his world made easy. That cost him. I saw it. Then Dante changed the angle of the gun and fired once into Alessio's shoulder, dropping him fully without killing him. Luca, Dante said, voice flat. He goes to the federal task force with the ledgers, alive. Alessio stared up at him in actual horror. There it was, the real defeat, not death, exposure, a life stripped of shadows and leverage. By the time the sirens came in the distance, because Dante had, impossibly, arranged cooperation where silence usually lived, the chapel above us had gone quiet. Marco died before dawn. Francesca was with him. So was Luca. When the sun finally rose pale over the lake, Dante stood on the terrace alone, the watch in his hand, and I stood beside him without speaking. It had cost him a cleaner revenge. It had cost us Marco. It had cost whatever version of the past still pretended this family could bleed without consequence. Dante opened the watch, closed it, click. Then into the cold morning air he said the words the whole house had been waiting to hear. It is over. What comes after war, there were forms, not metaphorical ones, actual paperwork. Statements, emergency injunctions, asset seizures, lawyers whose voices sounded like folded napkins. Federal agents who arrived in careful shoes and looked faintly sick the first time they understood how much of the city had been balanced on old blood and newer accounting. After war, there were funerals too. Marco's was small by Salvator standards and immense by the standard that mattered, which was grief. Francesca stood between her daughters in black gloves and a spine made of something fiercer than elegance. Luca carried the coffin with 3 other men and looked older when it was done. Paolo cried openly behind his sunglasses, then denied it was crying and blamed highly aggressive wind. Lucia kissed his cheek and called him impossible. He nearly passed out from joy and sodium depletion. I stood beside Teresa near the back of the church and understood, for the first time, how people survived worlds like this. Not because the violence became normal. It didn't. Because tenderness learned to exist in direct defiance of it. Dante did not speak at the graveside. He didn't need to. Every man present watched him lower a white rose onto the coffin. And in that silence was apology, leadership, debt, and the kind of love men like him would rather die than pronounce cleanly. 6 weeks later, the lake house felt less like captivity and more like a place where I had accidentally left pieces of myself in every room. My shop had reopened with Teresa's help, Luca's invisible security, and Paolo's endless campaign to convince Nina that protein powder was a valid emergency gift basket item. Nina, to her eternal credit, threatened him with a stapler and then kept the basket anyway. I worked 3 days a week downtown and 4 at the lake house workshop by choice. That still startled me. Dante never asked for an answer to a question he had not earned. He never told me what role to play in his life after Alessio's fall, scattered half the city's criminal loyalties, and fused the rest more tightly around him. We moved around each other with the care of people carrying lit matches near old paper. Some nights he kissed me in the office with one hand braced on the desk, as if he still expected the room to disappear beneath us. Some nights he only touched the inside of my wrist and left before either of us had to explain why that felt more intimate than 100 easier things. The nickname changed before I realized it had. The first time he said "little clock" at my shop, he was holding a paper bag from the bakery 2 doors down and looking faintly displeased that I had skipped lunch again. "You forget to eat when you're concentrating," he said. "That's rich coming from you." He set the bag on my bench, warm almond pastries, my weakness. I looked up. Is this extortion? It's intervention. The word "little clock" in his mouth no longer sounded like an assessment of function. It sounded dangerously close to care. That was probably why I almost ruined the moment by dropping a tray of tiny screws. He caught the tray before it tipped. Almost. By November, the city had grown mean with cold. The first lake wind that truly bit came the night Dante asked me to meet him at a restaurant on the north side. One of those quiet old places with white tablecloths, and a staff discreet enough to pretend they did not know who owned which district after dark. I wore black because I did not trust bright colors around important evenings. Dante arrived late by 7 minutes and apologized with his eyes, which would have scandalized half the city if they had seen it. We ate veal, drank nothing stronger than mineral water. Talked about Lucia finally agreeing to one date with Paolo, strictly to prove I can survive 3 hours of nonsense, in her words. Paolo, upon hearing this, had called Luca in tears, and then spent an entire afternoon buying jackets that made him look like a man auditioning to sell luxury sedans. He asked me if cashmere communicates emotional maturity, Dante said. I laughed so hard I had to put down my fork. Then the laughter eased. The room warmed. Outside, snow started lightly against the window. Dante reached into his inside pocket. My heart stumbled. He didn't produce a ring box. He set the silver watch between us. Click. Opened. Closed. I carried this through every bad decision I ever survived, he said, and a few I didn't. His hand rested over it. I used to think love made men imprecise. My father believed that. Alessio weaponized it. I built a life around never giving anyone the minute hand again. I couldn't speak. He looked at me directly, the way he only did when he was willing to bleed for a sentence. Then you counted backward under a table instead of screaming, he said. And I've been trying to understand what that did to me ever since. My eyes stung. Dante exhaled once slow. I'm not asking you for something clean, Elena. There is no clean version of me to offer. There is only the man who will choose you before himself, badly and repeatedly, for the rest of his life if you let him. Then he placed a ring beside the watch, not a fairy tale performance. No kneeling in public, no violin swell, just weight, truth, survival asking for a future. I touched the ring and hated how much my hand shook. What if I still don't know how to do this? I whispered. You don't have to know first. That was such a Dante answer I almost laughed through the tears. What exactly are you asking? His mouth changed, that rare near smile that felt like finding a warm light in a condemned building. Stay, he said quietly, not because you can't leave. Because you choose the table by the window anyway. I put the ring on. His eyes closed for half a second, and in that tiny break in his composure, I saw the full weight of what it cost him to hope. Later, walking back to the car while snow collected on my coat sleeve, he took my hand openly on the sidewalk. No guards close enough to explain it away. No emergency to justify the touch. Just us. At the car door, he bent and pressed his mouth to my gloved knuckles. Cold? He asked. Yes. He opened the door, tucked me in, and said with full warmth, now, I've got you, little clock. It sounded nothing like Chapter 1. At home, Paolo and Lucia were in the kitchen arguing over whether his date's scarf had looked European or medically concerning. Teresa was making tea. Luca was pretending not to smile. The whole house felt, for one impossible moment, almost ordinary. That was the strangest miracle of all. The life they built. 9 months later, the first thing I noticed was the click. Soft. Metallic, familiar. I looked up from the pastry table in the Bellafont Hotel ballroom and found Dante across the room, opening his father's silver pocket watch with one hand, while 3 aldermen and a bishop tried very hard not to look like men who owed him favors. The hotel had replaced the West Pillar wallpaper after the shooting. They had not changed the chandelier. I had mixed feelings about that. This gala was for the Marco Bellini Memorial Fund, which gave scholarships to daughters of city workers and small business owners who had lost family to organized violence, corruption, or the ordinary cruelty of money. Francesca ran it with terrifying competence. Luca handled security. Paolo, in a midnight blue tuxedo he claimed made him visually honest, had eaten 4 canapes and spent the last hour trying to act casual every time Lucia adjusted his tie. He failed beautifully. Stop staring at her, Luca told him as they passed my table. I'm not staring, Paolo whispered. I'm appreciating future domestic possibilities. She's bringing you a glass of water. That's how love begins. It begins with hydration. In my case, yes. I'm fragile. I bit back a smile and set another tray straight. My own life no longer looked like something stolen from me. It looked built. The restoration shop had expanded into the empty unit next door. Nina ran front of house like a benevolent tyrant. Teresa had started teaching me her mother's recipes and pretended not to glow when I got the sauce right without calling her twice. Lucia and Paolo were not technically together, which only meant their arguments had become more affectionate, and everybody else had to endure the slowest courtship in Chicago. Francesca had made me godmother to Marco's youngest daughter after a terrifyingly quiet lunch in which refusal was never truly an option. And Dante, well, Dante still entered rooms like a verdict. But at home, he sometimes stood in the workshop doorway with his tie loose and watched me work in a silence that felt so intimate I had to tell him to either speak or stop looking at my hands like that. Sometimes he answered by crossing the room and kissing the inside of my wrist. Sometimes he only said, "No," and left me blushing among the clock springs. He had not become safe. Neither had I, entirely. But there are lives that become truer precisely because they stop pretending safety was ever the point. A little girl in a pale green dress tugged at the hem of my gown. Not the same child from the shooting. Another one, 7 maybe. Wide eyes, glossy curls, too much glitter on her shoes. "There's a loud man by the kitchen," she whispered. I followed her gaze. One of the catering assistants stood too rigid near the service doors, tray held wrong, too careful, too aware of his sleeve. The room shifted under my skin. Not again exactly. Never the same fear twice, but close enough for my pulse to go cold and clean. 5 minutes, some part of me thought, or maybe less. I crouched immediately, bringing myself level with the child. "Listen to me," I said softly. "I need you to go to the woman in the silver dress by the stage. That's Francesca. Tell her Alina said to walk you to the garden hall for cake." "Can you do that?" The girl nodded. "Good, and count backward from 10 while you go, out loud if you have to." Her brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because it helps." She scampered off. Across the ballroom, Dante was already looking at me. He had seen the change in my face before I moved. That still did something unbearable to my chest. I crossed to him through the crowd without hurrying. Didn't touch his sleeve until I reached him. Didn't need to. "Service door," I said. "Assistant with the champagne tray, wrong grip." "Weighted sleeve." Dante's eyes changed. No alarm, no doubt, only trust. He gave 1-minute instruction to Luca without turning his head. Men moved, quietly, cleanly. A bishop kept smiling into his wineglass, entirely unaware that 4 armed professionals had just redirected the shape of the evening around him. Within 90 seconds, the assistant was in custody in a linen closet with 2 false credentials and a ceramic knife taped to his forearm. No shots fired. No blood on marble. Just danger arriving to find this room no longer belonged to it. When the immediate threat had been sealed away, and the music resumed with almost obscene elegance, Dante took my hand and led me through the side corridor into the empty library off the ballroom. He shut the door. Click, not the watch, the lock. I laughed once from sheer nerves. "That sound used to make me hate you." "I know." His hands came up to my face, not urgent, not rough, just there. Warm, certain. "You did it again," he said. I swallowed. "What?" "Found the break in time before it broke." The line between us went quiet. Then his thumb stroked just once over my cheek, and I understood this had nothing to do with the service door assistant anymore. "The first night," he said, voice lower now, "you counted backward with a child you didn't know while bullets hit glass over your head." I thought about it in hospitals, in meetings, in rooms full of men who would have killed to hear me admit this. His mouth changed in that rare, devastating way. "You still spend your fear making room for someone else." There it was. Chapter 1 returned with a different weight. The bookend, the reason, the wound and the healing in one sentence. I put my hand over the watch in his pocket, felt the outline through the fabric. "And you still listen when I tell you time is wrong." "I listened to you before time now." That cost him to say. I knew it did. I kissed him first only on the cheek, because innocence surviving intact did not mean love stayed timid. It meant it kept its own shape. He turned his face just enough that my mouth brushed the corner of his once, almost even now. He breathed out a laugh I felt more than heard. "Dangerous," he murmured. "So I've been told." When he drew the watch out at last, the silver was warmer from his body heat. He opened it with his thumb. Click. The same gesture as the beginning, completely transformed. In Chapter 1, it had meant measurement, suspicion, control. Here, in the library light, with the gala safe outside and our lives layered thick with everything we had survived, it meant memory. It meant witness. It meant he no longer carried time alone. He placed the watch in my palm. For 1 second I could not breathe. "Dante, it was my father S," he said. Then it was the worst minute of my life. Then it was war. His fingers closed mine over it. "Now it's ours," I cried then, quietly, not from weakness. From the unbearable, ordinary miracle of being trusted with the object that had once contained all his grief. He kissed those tears away with maddening patience. "Easy little clock," he said, and the nickname settled around me like the safest, dangerous thing I had ever known. Outside the library, music swelled. Someone laughed. Paolo's voice rose in scandalized delight about carb-heavy desserts and emotional breakthroughs. Lucia told him to lower his voice, or she would sedate him in public. Life, ridiculous and bruised and precious, went on. I looked at Dante and thought, the ordinary life was the most radical thing we had built, not because the world had become gentle, because we had chosen tenderness without lying about the knives. Later, when the gala ended and snow started lightly over the hotel steps, he tucked my hand into the crook of his arm and walked me to the car past cameras, city lights, and men who would never fully understand that the fiercest thing Dante Salvator had ever done was learn how not to lose every minute to the one that broke him. Some costs do not disappear just because love survives them. Rosa was still dead. My father was still complicated. Marco was still gone. Those absences did not shrink to make room for happiness. Happiness learned to live beside them. And maybe that is the real question the story leaves behind. If loving someone means stepping into a life that will never be clean but might still be true, would you choose it anyway? Would you have chosen Dante and let all that cost stand?